Here we go. Hello, Ben. How you doing?
Hey Guy, I'm really well, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. I'm really excited to kind of do a proper deep dive into your company, Origen Carbon, in the same way that I always do. Super keen to understand the person behind the business. So to kick it off, I'd love it if you could just do a sort of introduction of yourself, and importantly, just highlight some of the points of your career that had led up to the founding of this company, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'd probably describe myself as a self-professed carbon dioxide nerd, if
Okay.
that's a fair description of myself. But from an academic perspective, I have a background in climate science and geology,
Yeah.
so everything to do with climate, but perhaps more so kind of the atmosphere and the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is something that I've been incredibly passionate about since my teenage years when I went to university. Coming out of that, though, I spent the best part of a decade in finance. I worked in investment banking and I worked in asset management, where I was able to get a really great appreciation of kind of what commercialization from a business perspective really looks like. And I've also had first-hand experience with kind of trading carbon itself. And then I think what really led me towards Origin was the year of 2018. There was a huge amount happening in the carbon markets, in particular in Europe, where a restructuring of the emissions trading scheme saw carbon move from about €6 a ton at the beginning of that year to upwards of €20 per ton by the back end of that year. And in parallel with that, the IPCC report was released in, I think it was kind of Q4 of that year. In that report, carbon dioxide removal is explicitly called out. We need to remove upwards of 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at the upper bound. I did some really simple maths, the price of carbon multiplied by that number, and it threw out a pretty large market opportunity. And that's really what got me thinking about repurposing those skills and actually building on that fundamental passion that I had from my university days to get involved in carbon dioxide removal.
Okay, fantastic. So you're sitting there at your desk in 2018 thinking, hang on a sec, there's an opportunity here. I'm that you're pretty excited about. How did you react to that? Is that something that you then kind of, down on the back of a scrap piece of paper, start jotting an idea down? Did you start pulling in a few people around you? I'm always interested that transition from, a nice, safe, secure corporate job where you can't do too much wrong, and then going into the idea of becoming a founder, risking it all, and going from there. It just how did that transition happen?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is I'd kind of grown slightly disenchanted by what I was doing in finance. Finance is absolutely fundamental here, but I really wanted to build something from scratch. And so I actually spent a weekend researching what was available on carbon dioxide removal, and it was pretty scant at that point in time. There was some good academic papers, but not many kind of commercial enterprises doing anything. And so I started mapping out that landscape, and I spent the best part of 6 months meeting various people who are involved in climate more generally, but also carbon dioxide removal specifically. And in late 2018, early 2019, met a gentleman called Tim Kruger. Tim is the original founder of Origin. The business was founded in 2013, and he ran the carbon dioxide removal initiative at Oxford University. So he had a really solid grounding in the science, and he had this fantastic concept, which is what we're kind of commercializing at Origin, but it wasn't particularly well developed at that point in time. And that's certainly no criticism aimed at Tim whatsoever. It was early days of carbon dioxide removal. And so I think I saw an opportunity here to really think commercially, to think about the problems that different sectors, the populace at large had. And I really set about committing to that. And that's ultimately how I got involved with Origin in early 2019.
Fantastic. Okay, so then you've taken it from an idea that was in your head that you've run the calculations, you've seen the growth of the market kind of treble, if not quadruple, in a short amount of time, and you've gone, I want to get into that space, and then you found Origin and kind of I guess, taken a proposition to them to say, if I come in, I can do X, Y, and Z. And would you describe yourself as a sort of a co-founder in the kind of new formed company?
Yeah, I think so. We've had a bumpy journey, to say the least. I think all startups have pretty bumpy journeys. I think what was challenging in the 2018, 2019 period was there was not an immediate problem that we were trying to solve. And so the way I came into the business was, how do we think about positioning this business to solve a specific problem? And even if that problem is a bit of a stepping stone to this carbon dioxide removal problem, at least it demonstrates a clear route to kind of commerciality. And over the course of the past 6 to 7 years or so that I've been involved with this, we've probably pivoted a couple of times, as most good businesses ultimately do, so that they can stay alive and take advantage of new opportunities. So yes, I think I would. But as I said, Tim is ultimately the original kind of light bulb moment back in 2013 that really got this business established.
Okay, perfect. Let's dive into what we've got today. I guess let's have a crack at what an elevator style pitch would be if you were to explain what Origen is today. That would be brilliant.
Yeah, so I think the context here is absolutely vital, and many people will know this already, but I think it's really important to land. It's not enough to simply reduce our emissions, i.e. mitigate what we emit. There is so much carbon dioxide that is in the atmosphere already, and until we get those emissions down to zero, there is more CO2 going into the atmosphere itself. So we actually need to mitigate and remove carbon dioxide. So Origen is focused on the removal side of that equation.
Yeah, very clear.
We have developed a limestone-based direct air capture process. So we leverage the mineral limestone, which is about 10% of the world's surface mineral. We use a thermal process to essentially activate it, make it really carbon dioxide hungry. And so we have a proprietary kiln technology where we heat that limestone up to about 1,000 degrees centigrade to produce lime and a pure stream of carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide is stored underground. And then we use that lime. We produce these little carbon hungry granules that are about 4 millimeters across. And then we put them in a proprietary air contactor where we pass atmospheric air over those granules. Those granules react with carbon dioxide in the air, reforming the limestone that we originally started with. And we can loop that back into the beginning of the process and basically repeat it. So each time you go around that process, you're removing carbon dioxide from the air. So that's kind of things from a technology perspective. I think 3 key points I would really land here. One, we're differentiated versus a lot of the other players who are using limestone to do either carbon removal or indeed carbon capture, i.e. mitigation. We own the full stack of technologies. The kiln is really critical here. There's lots of technologies wanting to use lime to capture or remove CO2, but unless you can produce that lime in the way that we produce it, you don't have a process.
Yeah.
Secondly, we use thermal energy derived from either natural gas or renewable natural gas. That gives us a deployment advantage, especially when you think about the energy demands from data centers and whatnot. And then I think the third point I'd really want to land is we've designed this process for scale from the get-go. So we are already using pre-existing kind of processes and components that are demonstrated at scale in cement, lime, minerals industries, and basically repurposing them for this. So that's us really in a nutshell. Plenty to talk about in terms of the approach and commercialization, but that's ultimately the tech and why we think we're different.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a really, really succinct and clear explanation of exactly what the technology does and the where you sit in that removal side of the market. So let's go into the commercialization. Where and how do you make money?
Yeah, so maybe if I just step back one moment. For commercializing this type of technology, which is kind of hardware and infrastructure scale, partnerships are absolutely fundamental. If we were to develop a greenfield commercial project, I'd tend to say the risks for a business like us would be pretty extreme. We would have to be finding sites, permits, planning, etc., etc. one of the fundamental approaches that we take when it comes to kind of commercialization and making money is to develop partnerships. And those partnerships are typically with world-class partners. So we work with a Canadian engineering organization called Hatch, who have a huge amount of experience in the minerals and the metals industries. So really really parallel industries to what we're doing. We also work with many of the world's largest oil and gas majors, Shell as an example. We work with other organizations, and we're also developing a project alongside Mitsubishi Corp. So I think that approach, again, is slightly differentiated versus others. We recognize what we know. We recognize where the gaps in terms of that commercialization journey are, and certainly partnerships and sites and leveraging those capabilities is really critical. If I flip that over to commercialization itself, the way we are thinking about our first commercial deployments is kind of a co-development model. So we are responsible for our technology development and deployment, and our partners are typically responsible for the site, the permitting, the infrastructure around that. We term it balance of plant, and then kind of compression, transport, and storage. And what that allows us to do is de-risk delivery, which is really critical when you're doing these big projects. And then to really simplify it here, the way we think and the way we've structured some of our agreements for these first commercial projects is essentially a co-development agreement. So each partner contributes the necessary capital to cover their parts of the project. Let's say it's split 50-50 in terms of capital commitment. The project level cash flows are paid out on a pro rata basis to ourselves and our project partners. And as long as the project is profitable, ultimately everybody's happy. And that's really how we think about those first projects and commercializing technology. Further down the line, we may replicate that model. We may also, with much more data and much more clarity around the value proposition, license that technology to other project developers, and that allows us to be a little bit more capital light on a go-forward basis.
Okay, that's clear. And where are you at on the commercialization journey? It sounds as though you've got very good partners in place. You've got the technology. What's the kind of next step in kind of, actually becoming, are you already on revenue generating side of things?
Yes, so we are not yet revenue generating. Difficult to generate genuine revenues with a technology that is just being demonstrated. So 2025 has been an amazing year for us as an organization. We got our demo facility online in North Dakota with an amazing partner called the Environmental and Energy Research Center at the University of North Dakota. That demo is a pretty large piece of kit. And we've spent this year de-risking that technology, taking it basically from technology readiness level 4 to technology readiness level 7. So that's a major de-risk for us. In parallel with that work, we have been doing what we would term a pre-FEED study. If I expand that, it's a preliminary front-end engineering design. For anybody who's an engineer or a project person, you'll know what it means. But for those who are not so familiar with it, it's basically the first stage of heavy-duty engineering you do when you're bringing these types of projects online. That's about 80% complete. We should be finalizing that at the beginning, let's say Q1 next year.
Yep.
And that will then open up a stage gate to the next level, which is called front-end engineering design, or FEED. So for a technology like this, which we've kind of de-risked scientifically, de-risked technically, we're now moving through much more detailed engineering design. We're moving to more of the commercial contracting stage. And over the course of the next 18 to 24 months, we'll be working towards what we call a final investment decision, which is, do we go and build this project or do we pull the plug on it?
Fantastic. And what just to kind of summarize, because that gives a really clear picture on kind of where you're at. So far we've got a clear picture on, where the ideas come from, what the business is and the technology that you're sitting on, the commercial model, and kind of, I wanted to dig into kind of what you've achieved to date, but you've just clarified that in kind of, you've built a pilot, you're now rolling out into commercial contracts, and it's kind of, it feels like you're at a really exciting kind of inception point where actually, you've got all the pieces of the puzzle. It's now actually about rolling this out into the market. And on that side of the market, what is the opportunity that you see in front of you? How big is this opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, it's gigantic. The way I would tend to frame this is carbon dioxide removal as an industry, not necessarily our particular pathway to achieving carbon dioxide removal, is an industry that is the size of the combined oil, gas, coal industries, anything else that's hydrocarbon derived, in reverse. So if you think about the scale of those industries, we need something that is comparable to that to address this kind of climate challenge from a carbon dioxide removal perspective. Now, some of that can be achieved by reforestation, afforestation, and we should absolutely be all in on those as best we can because they're arguably the fastest route in the short term to being able to remove carbon dioxide. Then there's a whole host of other routes, some of which are fast, some of which are slow, some of which are expensive, some of which are cheap, some of which have various different trade-offs, but ultimately we need a portfolio of solutions. Very simply, in answer to your question, we are talking trillion-dollar industry here, multi-trillion-dollar industry, with the leaders of the industry likely to be billion-dollar plus businesses. I obviously think Origen can be one of those companies, but I think there's going to be a handful of other companies competing in this space too.
Okay, and just to get onto that sort of competitive landscape, just give us a bit of an indication of what that looks like. And then also if there's what's the defendability of what you're doing?
Yeah, competition's a pretty wide topic for discussion really, Guy. I'd say because there are so many different routes to carbon dioxide removal, there are lots of pros and cons of each of those different routes. I think what's probably best here is if I zoom into what we term engineered carbon dioxide removal. And so in there, I put like direct air capture. I would put a route that we call bioenergy carbon capture and storage, or BECCS, which is typically burning biomass to create energy, capturing the CO2 off that. The CO2 is biogenically derived, and if you store it, you've got carbon negativity. And then there's some other routes like enhanced weathering, where there is a little bit of kind of engineered nature to it, but it's actually kind of forming its own kind of vertical there. So if I just stick on maybe the direct air capture side of things, there's a couple of different routes. And again, I'm being pretty generalist here. For anyone who wants to deep dive it, we can deep dive it. But I'd say you've typically got a liquid-based route and a solid-based route. We are a solid sorbent. We're using calcium oxide, a solid itself, to remove CO2 from the air. I think if I zoom in a little bit further, our most tangible competitors are organizations who are also working on limestone-based removal routes. There's a company out in the US called Heirloom. There's another company called Heimdall. There's another company called Calcite. All of us are using the same chemistry. I think the one point I want to make, and I made this earlier, that we are different versus those, is we own the full stack of technologies. We own the kiln, we own the processing steps, we own the contactors. That confers advantages in terms of system integration, which then allows us to get down cost curves more quickly and more effectively. Secondly, because we own the full stack, we reduce partner risk. A lot of those companies are bringing in kilns from elsewhere. That's challenging because those kilns are often not bespokely designed for a specific process. And then I'd expand it maybe to organizations like Climeworks. And then there's an organization called Carbon Engineering who were bought out by a big US oil and gas company called Oxy. So that's probably the DAC landscape in a nutshell. And we need to get more nuanced if we're going to dive into it. I think Origen's probably biggest competitor from a pathway process is bioenergy carbon capture and storage. The price points are really attractive at this point in time. It's pretty quick to market, i.e. you can bring these technologies online at meaningful scale, probably by 2030, which is interesting timelines. And for us, we are above those price points and we are longer to market just because of the maturity of the technologies. As I've said in terms of my framing here, we need a portfolio approach, though. There is no single technology that is going to solve this whole carbon dioxide removal conundrum. And so running technologies that are maybe more expensive but can come down a cost curve and investing in those I think is fundamental to ensuring we solve this problem ultimately in the long run, but also in the most cost-effective manner.
Okay. And just coming into the sort of the cost, it sounds as though a huge amount of cost will have gone into the kind of R&D and development of owning your own tech stack. So let's just dig into kind of what the funding journey has looked like so far for Origen and kind of what's coming next.
Yeah, sure. So we've raised upwards of £20 million thus far. I think the exact number is about £22.5 million. And then I'd layer on top of that £3 million or so of government grants.
Yeah.
So as part of developing our technology, it has been capital intensive. The project that we delivered in North Dakota this year cost us, £6 million or so just to kind of demonstrate. And then there's all the pre-work that's gone on before that. And obviously you're paying people for their time, et cetera, et cetera. So thus far, we've raised that amount of money. Remind me what your follow-on question from that was, Guy?
Yeah, so I just wanted to, you've explained nicely of kind of what you've raised to date in order to get to where you are, which is the sort of 20 million plus. Just before we really dig into the next part, which is kind of what's next with regards to funding, where's that investment come from beyond the kind of government grants?
Yeah, sure. So we've been extremely fortunate to secure a really decent amount of money from angels and high net worths, which is really what sustained us for the kind of first 4 or 5 years of my involvement with Origen. We have typically raised capital beyond that group from more strategically oriented investors. So we have secured investment as part of our Series A from Barclays Climate Ventures. So they bring a wealth of expertise in terms of carbon markets and in terms of infrastructure financing. So that's kind of how we view the strategic overlap there. Shell is a big investor from the business unit side of things. That's who we are developing this first commercial facility with. We also have strategic investment from Hatch, who I mentioned previously were our engineering consultant. And then I think what's really valuable for us is we also secured investment from an organization called MLC, Mississippi Lime Company, as they were previously known. They are the largest US-based lime manufacturer based in St. Louis in Missouri. We have worked very closely with them for a protracted period of time. They've been really helpful with our demo testing. And if there's opportunities to do projects with them in the future, then I think it would make a lot of sense to do that. So yeah, much more strategic than your typical venture type funding. But then I think that's also reflective of the fact that we are hardware, capital intensive, quite long lead cycle to bring hardware technology from kind of concept and ideation in the lab or indeed in the mine through to commercial infrastructure scale deployments.
Definitely. Okay. And then what's next with regards to funding?
Yeah, I'm super excited about like where we have got to through 2025. And so for us, we are working to mature a number of projects. The most mature of those projects at this point in time is this Pelican project I've mentioned with Shell and Mitsubishi in Louisiana. We are developing a number of other projects as well. I don't think we should put all of our eggs in one basket. Some of those are relatively new. I'm really encouraged by the positive developments in the UK, just as an example. And I think Canada is really stepping into the void left by the kind of political headwinds that we're facing from a US perspective. So really the capital that we're raising right now is to mature projects. Technology is ready. We now need to scale that up and kind of deploy those first revenue generating projects. For us, we're looking at raising about £5 million, which would provide us with runway out until I'd say mid-2027. That would allow us to mature certainly this Pelican project. But I think, as I said, and more really importantly, make sure that we've got other projects in the pipeline. I think it's a dangerous strategy to have everything kind of all on red or all on black, whatever analogy you want to use. So for us, it is really about, as I said, developing other projects for that scale up and first revenues, where we'd expect first revenues kind of the back end of the 20s. If we can do anything to pull things forwards, we'll absolutely do that. But I think it can be at times quite difficult when you're deploying hardware.
Okay, brilliant. And so what's the next step, sort of immediate focus? Is it funding and then focused on the projects that you've mentioned?
Yeah, I'd say bringing in this additional capital will allow us to do really three things. One is mature that Pelican project and all of the commercials that go with it. I think it's always sensible, whilst we've de-risked the technology, we can always be doing more to reduce risks and come down the cost curve. So we'll continue investing in innovation and R&D. We've got this fantastic asset in North Dakota, so it would be remiss of us to not continue using that. And then obviously, as I've mentioned, there are other project opportunities that we want to kind of mature. That requires people's time and that requires engineering input to get those to the point where we can kind of press go on taking those projects to the next stage gate.
Fantastic. And if you could just blink and take yourself sort of 5 years forward, what do you think Origen will look like?
I see us having a first commercial facility operational and delivering and retiring carbon dioxide removal credits, whether or not that's in the US, whether or not it's Canada, whether or not it's the UK or another geography remains to be seen. That's why you develop a pipeline of project. But I think what's really important is with that first facility online, de-risks the business significantly. It's a technical de-risk, it's a commercial de-risk, and it's a financeability de-risk. And what I'd like to see with that project or that facility online is then a pipeline of opportunities where we're getting to mega scale, i.e. millions of tons of carbon dioxide removal projects in the pipeline for deployment through the 20s, so that we're in a position to have meaningful impact as those technologies or those projects come online. And then from there, we can really scale quite aggressively.
Fantastic. Okay. I think that is enough of a bombardment of questions from me, because I think we've now got a very clear picture on kind of where the concepts come from, what the business is doing, and kind of where you're at with regards to the kind of the development cycle. Really clear commercial model, clearly very well backed by some very strategic partners, and a huge amount of opportunity in front of you to try. It's a rapidly evolving and growing market that is really going to come into fruition, and seemingly you're getting yourself into position with a unique proposition that's very exciting. So massive hats off to you for what you've achieved to date, because it's no mean feat getting out there and building something that's this technically intensive and pushing all the way through and getting the right people around you, which you clearly have. So I can see why you're excited, and 2025 has been a good year for Origen. Before we do wrap things up, I always like to end our conversations on other people or other founders and businesses that really stand out to inspire you at the moment, ones that you might be looking at as that you can learn from, or ones that are in totally different worlds that you just think what they're doing is brilliant and the world needs it.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to be part of an ecosystem in the US called Elemental Impact, who have just been an incredibly supportive organization for us. We've been involved with them for the past 3 years or so. And actually, there's two founders and CEOs at two elemental companies that really inspire me. There's a chap called Tim Latimer at Fervo Energy. They're developing geothermal, and what they have been able to do is just absolutely incredible, both from a technical perspective, a commercial perspective, but also the way in which they've been able to unlock different capital stacks to be able to deploy that technology and then scale it is awesome. So check out Fervo Energy, because what they're doing is amazing and it's inspirational for me. And I see parallels between what they have done and what we are trying to do. And I think we can leverage a lot of those learnings. And then the other is a chap called Claudio at a company called Energy Dome. They're developing long duration energy storage. They use carbon dioxide actually for that process. And so Claudio and I spend a lot of time when we're together kind of talking about the great thing that carbon dioxide is. They too have developed a technology and are at the point now a little further ahead than us in terms of they are deploying at commercial scale. But again, Claudio's done an amazing job there of being able to de-risk a technology, bring in huge amounts of capital from a whole host of different angles, and actually build these projects. And so for me, I am motivated not by cool technologies, although cool technologies are exciting. I am motivated by steel in the ground, getting these things built and having meaningful climate impact. And I think for where we are at Origen, having de-risked our technology and moving to that next stage, I'm really excited about seeing steel in the ground with technology removing CO2 from the air at relatively meaningful scale for where we're at in the journey and where this industry is at this point in time.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds as though, you know, that jump in 2018, 2019 was well worth it. And it was a calculated one. And with your experience as a self-confessed carbon dioxide nerd and your experience in finance, it's no surprise that you kind of landed where you are, because there's clearly a passion in what you're doing, but also behind that a fantastic commercial model. And that's half the battle. It can't just be good ideas. It's got to add up, and you're making very good headway. So yeah, thank you for sharing those inspirations. I'll definitely check them out. And thank you very much for joining me today on this Blue Earth podcast. And good luck with the next steps. As a ventures member, we'll be right behind you, and we'll be supporting you and opening as many doors as we can, both at our events and digitally, and introducing you to lots of investors. And hopefully there's plenty of them listening to this and getting an understanding of who you are and what you're doing. So thank you very much, Ben, and looking forward to catching up soon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the really involved discussion, Guy, and looking forward to making carbon dioxide removal a reality.
Great. Cheers, Ben.
Thanks a lot.